Hello, it's Catherine again, and today's training session is all about sentence composition. So the way a sentence is put together is called sentence composition. So the required elements of the sentence put together differ by each year group. As we move up the school, the sentence structure and composition becomes more complex as new structures are learnt and built upon. Throughout this training, you'll learn how the different elements are taught in each year group and how they can be applied in a piece of writing. Now, it's important to know that obviously as you move on to the next year group, it includes all the previous years before it as well. So, EYFS. I'm showing myself a little bit smaller. Move out of the way. There we go. So as children began to write sentences rather than single words, they need to be able to mark the sentence boundaries with punctuation. That's the first crucial step in understanding what a sentence is. So it's difficult to give a meaningful explanation of what a sentence is for EYFS, but through experiences such as shared reading and shared writing and the discussion of sentence punctuation, children can really develop a sense of what sentences are. So here are some basic developmental pathways that lead from early mark making to the early learning of 5-year-olds. So children will begin to write their own names and other things such as labels and captions for items of things that are familiar to them. And they'll begin to form simple sentences, sometimes using punctuation. So these simple sentences will be strings of words put together that make sense. They might include a capital letter at the beginning, they might include a full stop at the end, and that can be added through discussion, through shared writing. So practitioners may support this development by using relevant terminology in a context. So let's read the next sentence now. Or I'm going to think about what to say in my sentence. Or have I finished my sentence yet? The more language that the children are exposed to and the more examples that children are exposed to, the more they'll learn, the more they'll pick it up. So, moving on to Key Stage 1. So, in Year 1, children are learnt how words can combine to make sentences, as well as joining words and joining clauses using the conjunction and. So, combining words to make sentences for Year 1 pupils. So this is shown by understanding the order that the words go in a sentence, and this can be through rearranging mixed up sentences. It can be generating their own sentences in the correct order, or self-correcting, or even correcting with support from yourself or from a peer. It can be identifying whether a sentence is in the correct or incorrect order, and it can be using capital letters and full stops to demark the beginning and the end of a sentence. So joining words and clauses using and. Okay, so a word is a single distinct meaningful element of speech used with others, or sometimes alone, and to form a sentence. And it's usually shown with a space on either side, finger spaces. A clause is a group of related words containing a subject that tells the readers what the sentence is about, and a verb that tells the readers what the subject is doing. So over here we've got the independent clause makes sense in its own, and all simple sentences include a clause. So the simple sentence here is the monster roared loudly. So the subject is the monster and the verb is roared. So the monster is roaring. That is the action that he is doing. So here we go. We've got two sentences at the top. We've got she listened to her teacher, and she did exactly as she was told. To join them together using the conjunction and, we've got she listened to her teacher and she did exactly as she was told. So the full stop here has been replaced by the and. So when we join two independent clauses together, so two clauses that make sense on their own, they become a compound sentence. So the monster roared loudly and he scared a little girl. So we're joining our independent clauses using the conjunction. The word and conjunction that we've used here is and. So moving on to Year 2. So as well as the previous year's work where we're joining sentences using and, we're now moving on to subordination, coordination, expanding noun phrases for description and specification, and talking about how grammatical patterns indicate whether the sentence is a statement, question, exclamation, or a command. So conjunctions. We've already know that conjunctions are words that join clauses into sentences. So the clause we've got, he is extremely unusual because, there's the conjunction, he is a Spider-Man. Now the conjunction used in year 1 with the focus was and, but now we're moving to year 2, we're moving on to a wider range of conjunctions. So subordination. So we already know that a conjunction is a word that joins two clauses together, and a subordinating clause is part of a sentence that adds additional information to the main clause. So a subordinating conjunction is simply the word or words used to join a subordinating clause to another clause or sentence. He was annoyed the train had stopped. He was annoyed because the train had stopped. By adding because, we're linking the subordinating clause, the train had stopped, with the main clause, he was annoyed. And here are some examples of some subordinating conjunctions. They can be used at the beginning of a subordinating clause, and a subordinating clause is a clause that doesn't make sense on its own. So you wouldn't say it or write it on its own without the main clause being present. So this is a good technique to remember. I saw a wabub, and we've got subordinating conjunctions can be if, since, as, when, although, while, after, before, until, and because. Now coordination. So this is where conjunctions are still used to join two clauses together, but the three main coordinating conjunctions are and, but, and or. So each clause needs to make sense on its own. So they are perfectly acceptable to be written on their own. So I had a terrible cold. I still went to work. Both of these sentences make sense on their own, but we can add, for example, the coordinating conjunction but to make it one full sentence. I had a terrible cold, but I still went to school. I went to work. So remember, you can often leave out the subject word in the second subcoordinating clause so you're not repeating yourself. So I had a terrible cold, but still went to school. Okay, so we've removed I, which is the subject of that sentence, just to avoid repetition and to make it a bit more concise. Now, some examples of coordinating conjunctions is fanboys. So for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And this is a really, really important point up here, that coordinating conjunctions give equal importance to the words or sentences they connect. Okay, so both clauses and all the words make sense on their own, and they are of equal importance. Okay, so we're also looking at expanding noun phrases. So in Key Stage 1, the addition of an adjective or two expands the noun by describing it. Okay, so we've got the noun over here is the lake. The noun phrase is the lake, because we've got the article in front of lake. So how have we expanded that sentence? How have we expanded that noun phrase to make it better, more exciting? We've had the addition of the adjective beautiful. So the beautiful lake. Okay, so that really elevates the description, and there can be addition of one or two adjectives in there. So it can be the beautiful deep lake. Now, last but not least, for year 2, so it's talking about the sentence function. So it's important that children recognise there are 4 distinct types of sentences at this point in their education. So we've got questions, commands, exclamations, and statements. Okay, so questions are sentences that ask you something. They usually end in a question mark. Okay, we say usually because obviously sometimes, very rarely, there are exceptions to the rules, so we say usually. But we can say that questions always end in a question mark, rhetorical or otherwise. So the example here is, what did you have for dinner? A command is a sentence that tells you to do something. They're found in instructions, but can also be very urgent or angry and can be very short. So help me. Please stop doing that. And they can end in an exclamation mark or a full stop, depending on the context of that sentence. an exclamation. Now, you quite often find that children say exclamations as explanations, but really try and correct that mistake, so it's exclamations. An exclamation is a sentence which begins with what or how. It's a full sentence, including a verb, which ends with an exclamation mark. What a dangerous mountain to climb. What amazing children they are. How kind of him to do that. Okay, and if you keep reaffirming that it's an exclamation sentence and it ends in an exclamation mark, the children will really link the use of an exclamation mark with that type of sentence. And finally, we are looking at statements. So statements are sentences which tell you something. They give you a piece of information and they usually end in a full stop. So a couple of examples here. We've got rainbows have 7 colours. They are beautiful to look at. And just another quick reminder on here. So statements usually end in a full stop, but can end in an exclamation mark. Commands can be punctuated with a full stop or an exclamation mark. Questions must end with a question mark. Yep, we clarified that before. And exclamations must end with an exclamation mark. Okay, so for a statement and a command, it's just dependent on the context of that sentence. But obviously, as you're generating more examples, you can say, at this point, you would use a full stop or you would use an exclamation mark because, and you can generate some examples with the children there. And here are a couple of sentence examples that you can see have been highlighted with some Key Stage 1 grammar points. Okay, now I forgot to mention at the beginning, please feel free to pause this video at any point to make notes, to look at the examples in more detail, to zoom in. So for example, if you want to look at the classification of each word and these sentences, please feel free to pause me now and take your time to have a good read through of those. Okay, but we can see that we've got an example here where we've got the expanded noun phrase, little brown dog. Okay, we've got lots of use of coordinating conjunctions on here. Okay, we've got talking about compounds, capital letters, full stops, exclamation marks. Okay, so take the time to have a look through these examples. Okay, so moving on to Key Stage 2. So we've got to remember that in Key Stage 2, we still need to know all of the previous components of sentences, as well as the new bits that are taught in each year group. So in Year 3, we are now beginning to express time, place and cause using conjunctions, adverbs or prepositions. Okay, so that's stepping up when we'd use conjunctions. Just move myself up here. So we already know that conjunctions link words and phrases together. Adverbs modify verbs. They tell you a little bit more about the verb. Okay, and they modify the adjectives and the clauses within that sentence. Prepositions describe the location, place, and time. Now, a really good hint that I use to help me remember what a preposition is, a preposition helps you remember the position. Okay, that's something that one of the teachers taught me. It's something that sticks in my head. So a preposition tells you where the position is. So on here, I've got some examples of some conjunctions, some adverbs and some prepositions, all that show the time that something's happening, the place that something's happening, or the cause as to why that something's happening. Okay, and remember that some words can appear in more than one column because they can belong to more than one word class. It depends within that sentence which class that word is. Okay, so let's have a look at some on here. So we've got some conjunctions. Okay, so these conjunctions are really useful for expressing time as to when something happened. These are brilliant for expressing place. Oh, let me go back, sorry. And these are brilliant for cause, so when something happened. So I've done some examples on here. So I've given an example for each. So for time, we've got I went to the park so I could play with my friends. That's using the conjunction so. Yesterday, I went to my friend's house. During the match, I scored a goal. Okay, and it's really important. I've put these examples here where the adverb and preposition is at the beginning of a sentence because obviously we can put the information at the beginning or in the middle. So in here we've got conjunction is so in the middle, but on here yesterday and during are at the beginning. So to express place, so we've got I put my shopping in the back of my car. I left my phone near my bed. I went through the door. Because, so I wore my wellies because it was snowing outside. I tidied my room so I didn't get told off. I did the homework for my teacher. Okay, and I've got a little quiz for you now. So feel free to pause it after this. So which sentence on here uses the word before as a conjunction? And which sentence on here uses the word after as a preposition? Okay, because you might see the word in a sentence where it doesn't have that function. So I will give you a little minute to think. Feel free to pause me at this point if you like. Okay. And here we go. So the old man put on his shoes before he chased the gingerbread man. That's when before is used as a conjunction. And the old woman didn't have anything to eat after her dinner. That's where the word after is used as a preposition. You would have got those right. Okay, so moving on to year 4. So in year 4, we are expanding noun phrases again, but in a little bit more detail by the addition of modifying adjectives, nouns and prepositional phrases. Okay, and we are also exploring fronted adverbials. So I'm just going to move myself around a little bit. So a prepositional phrase includes the object that the preposition in a sentence is referring to and any other words that link to the preposition. Okay, so for example, he hid beneath the duvet. We know that in that sentence, the preposition is beneath, okay, and the words that link to the preposition are the duvet. So just a quick reminder up here that we said a preposition's a word or group of words before a noun, pronoun or noun phrase to show direction, time, place, location, etc. Preposition, position. A prepositional phrase usually includes a preposition, a noun or pronoun. For example, we've got duvet is the noun there, but you might include a pronoun, and may include an adjective to describe that noun or pronoun. It does not include the verb. So within this sentence, hid was the verb. Hid is not part of the prepositional phrase. Move myself up here. So here are some examples of prepositional words. And here are some examples of prepositional phrases within basic sentences. So behind the wardrobe drawers were piles of unfolded and dirty clothes. Within that sentence, behind is the preposition. Behind the wardrobe drawers is the prepositional phrase. And again, we've got beyond the mountain range lies a green valley, and the girl hid under the table during a game of hide and seek. Okay, so looking now at expanded noun phrases again. So in year, in Key Stage 1, year 2, we were looking at expanding the noun phrase by year 1, we were adding a adjective to describe the noun. Okay, and we are continuing to add adjectives to describe the noun, but we're also including determinist and prepositional phrases to add even more information. Okay, so we know already that a noun is a thing, a person, an idea. We know that to expand the noun phrase provides extra information about the noun. You can use a determiner, adjectives and prepositional phrase within your expanding noun phrase to describe and specify details about the noun. Okay, so down here I've written an example is my, which is determiner, dilapidated rectangular, then my adjectives, treasure chest, as my noun, was left beside the banks of the river. Okay, so I've explored, given some adjectives what the treasure chest looked like, dilapidated rectangular treasure chest, and I said it was left beside the banks of the river. Okay, so instead of having my treasure chest, I now know what it looks like and I now know where it's left. Okay, and here are some examples of some determiners. Here are some examples of some adjectives. Here are some examples of nouns that you can use. And again, here are some more examples of prepositional phrases. Okay. So fronted adverbials. So an adverbial is a word, phrase or clause that's used, like an adverb, to modify the verb of the clause. Adverbs can be used as adverbials, but many other types of words, phrases and clauses can also be used in this way, including prepositional phrases and subordinate clauses. A fronted adverbial is used at the beginning of a sentence. Okay, hence why they're called fronted adverbials, because they go at the front. Fronted adverbials are used to describe the time something happens, the frequency or how often something happens, the place something happens, the manner in something happens or how something happens, and the possibility something happens. So how likely something has or will happen. Okay, here are a few examples on here. It's got before sunrise, every so often, at the back of the cave, as quick as a flash, almost certainly. And here I've just put a big long list of examples for you that you can use in your writing. So if you were to write a sentence and wanted to add a fronted adverbial, to the beginning of that sentence, here are some examples that you can include. Now, obviously, there are many more examples that might be relevant to your sentence, but these are just some good examples that you might want to have in your back pocket. Okay, so remember, a fronted adverbial talks about the time, so when something happens, the frequency or how often something happens, where something happens, the place, the manner in which it happens, so how it happens, and the possibility, how likely it is to happen or how likely it is to have had happened. Okay, moving on to year 5. So we're now looking at relative clauses, and we are indicating degrees of possibility using adverbs and modal verbs. Move myself down here. So a relative clause can be used to give additional information about a noun. They can be used to create complex sentences, as they are a type of subordinate clause. Relative clauses come directly after the noun they are referring to. This might be at the end of a sentence or embedded into the middle of the sentence. If embedded in the middle of the sentence, the relative clause is usually surrounded by commas. And I've just put a little star in here as a reminder. So a complex sentence is a sentence containing a subordinate clause or clauses. So relative pronouns. So relative clauses are introduced by a relative pronoun. Relative pronoun you will use depends on the person or type of thing you're writing about. So the relative pronouns can include who, which, that, when, or where. So I've got 2 example sentences here at the bottom. We've got the cubs took part in a challenge. They were in their house. So they were in their house is extra information which cannot be used on its own. So this forms the relative clause. Okay. Below, in this example here, the relative pronoun who is used. So I've got here's one of the examples, who, to create a relative clause so these 2 simple sentences can be connected. So the cubs who were in their house took part in a challenge. And this has been embedded within the sentence, so it has been surrounded by commas. Here we go. So I've got a couple more examples on here. So we've got the relative clause is used to add information about the noun. We know that, so it must be related to the noun. That's why it's called a relative clause, because it's related. Okay, so here are some examples of relative clauses. They're in purple. So she lives in Worcester, which is a cathedral city. So Worcester is the noun, and the relative clause, which is a cathedral city, is related to Worcester because it tells us about Worcester. So a few more examples here. And we also know that we've said a relative clause can be embedded within a clause if it's positioned in the middle of a sentence. So my gran, who is 82, still goes swimming every day. Okay, and it says that my gran, who is 82, we know that the noun that we're referring to is gran, and the extra information there is who is 82. There's another example there. Okay, so now we're looking at degrees of possibility. So some adverbs show how likely or unlikely something will happen. So either it will never happen, not ever, It describes something that will always happen, happens all the time. And it might, perhaps, maybe, perhaps it could happen. So there are degrees of possibility in between never and always. So here are some examples of adverbs. So certainly, definitely, obviously, doubtless or doubtlessly, they will tell you that something always happens. Possibly, perhaps, maybe, probably, sometimes, they are in between. It might happen, it might not happen. It can be dependent on circumstances, etc. And then we've got never and rarely. So these things will never, ever, ever happen. Not a chance. Now, it's not only adverbs that can show degrees of possibility. We also know that modal verbs can show degrees of possibility as well. So they are used with other verbs to indicate how possible something is. So we've got the example, I should tidy my room, I might tidy my room, I could tidy my room, or I must tidy my room. Okay, and the use of different modal verbs affects how likely that event is going to happen. So if it will definitely happen, so there's obligation behind there, so it's I should tidy my room, I must tidy my room, I ought to tidy my room. We've got certainly, so it definitely will happen. Will, would, might, may, and shall. Okay, so it may happen, it might not happen. And then we've got ability within there as well. So I can tidy my room, I could tidy my room. Okay, so the different modal verbs tells you how likely the event is going to happen. And finally, moving on to year 6. So we're talking about passive voice, talking about how that will affect the presentation of information in a sentence. And it's talking about formal and informal speech, informal and informal writing, so using speech structures within there. So, passive voice. So just to go through passive and active, because they can be a little bit tricky sometimes. So a sentence is written in active voice when the subject of the sentence is performing the action. A sentence is written in passive voice when the subject of the sentence has something done to it by someone or something else. So for example, on here we've got the cat was chasing the mouse. Okay, so that's an active voice because the cat is the subject, the was chasing is the verb, and the mouse is the object. So the cat is chasing the mouse on there. Now this sentence, the mouse was being chased by the cat, that is in passive voice because the mouse has become the subject and the mouse is having something done to it by the cat. It's being chased by the cat. So people tend to use the active voice rather than passive when they're writing, but the passive voice is often used for a particular reason. So for example, and here we've got graffiti had been scrawled all over the wall. Here, the person who's done the graffiti isn't known, so we can't write it in active because we don't know who did it. So this sentence is written in passive voice. Move myself up there. And then here again, we've got the votes have been counted. Here it's important to who counted the votes, but the fact that they have been counted. Okay, so you can also say that the most important thing in the sentence is the votes, which is why they are mentioned first in the sentence rather than last, as they would have been if it was in an active voice, because then they would have been at the end of the sentence. So people counted the votes. Okay, it's most important, so we've put it at the beginning. And finally, looking here at formal and informal. So I'll just move myself over here so I'm out of the way. So formal language is used for more official and serious purposes. The correct grammar should always be used with informal language. However, informal language can be used in informal situations and in informal writing. So it's a more relaxed, casual, chatty style, and it'll be where slang words and abbreviations are more acceptable. Over here, so formal language, which uses a specific vocabulary for the subject. This might be technical language, technical vocabulary that really refers to is specific to what the person is writing or speaking about. uses the correct grammar and punctuation all the time, has a serious tone, and often uses complex sentence structures. Whereas informal language uses more contractions and abbreviations, so it's rather than it is or TV. It's clear and to the point, it's a bit more chatty, uses cliches within there, and might also include textile words such as LOL, because you wouldn't write that in formal language. So here are a couple of examples of when formal and informal language might be used. So formal language when talking to the head teacher, presenting an award, letter of complaint, writing a report. Whereas informal language would be when talking to friends, talking on the phone to a family member, writing an email to a family member again, text to a friend, or a personal diary. Okay. And here are a couple of examples of a piece of writing that have been written in the formal and informal style. They are both the same, about the same subject, but with very different language choices used. So if you'd like to pause that and read those two examples. And that is it. Thank you very much for listening to me about sentence composition. So as I said, it's really important that year upon year, each year group builds upon the previous knowledge. It's important to remind children of that and remember that they might not be taught explicitly again in that year, but you might need to do a little bit of recap, especially if you're working within a small group or with certain children in your year group.